The sponsor for today's podcast is Repower Daily Electrolytes.
Hello, I'm Kieran O'Connor, and this is episode 14 of the Calculated Risk podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Smith. Kevin is the CEO and founder of Venturecom. He's a Cardiff-based entrepreneur and is an exited founder, having sold his last company, Credas, back in 2022. He's now started Venturecom to help other early-stage founders understand their numbers better when speaking to investors. Hello, Kevin. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kieran.
Good. I normally give a book out on my podcast, but you've already had a copy, and I'm sure you've read it.
I'm halfway through.
I thought that would be the answer.
Yeah.
And some gifts that we start with our new sponsor. So you've got some daily electrolytes there, 8 different flavors, and a new bottle that you can take to the office.
Amazing. Thank you, mate.
Perfect for you.
Very well received.
You may be aware that we start the podcast the same way every time, and it's delving deeper into people's risks that they've taken. So the first question I'd be really interested to hear from you is around your first big risk that you've taken at the beginning of your career. And how did you feel at the time?
Yeah, so I guess in career-wise, I mean, I've to take a risk personally, and in different ways. But career-wise, it was probably leaving my first kind of real big safe job, which was with a big financial institute, and starting my first startup, which was I had no idea what I was doing really. I just knew I didn't really want to carry on working for a corporate. Wasn't really enjoying it, so decided to do something else. It's strange, isn't it? Because I've done that same thing a few times throughout my career, but the profile of risk is very different based on where you are in your life. For me, it felt very risky at the time because I was 4 years into my career, 3 or 4 years into my career. So I'd only really just started, earning incredible money and actually settling into something, and to kind of give that up and go into a kind of zero guaranteed monthly wage scenario was pretty scary at the time. And it didn't probably work out great either. I mean, in terms of in terms of the worst case outcomes, it was probably somewhere near that, as in the company didn't make much money. We ended up closing it down. Never really amounted to much. But it's the experience, isn't it? And it's really hard to actually pick apart really whether a risk has worked out or not, because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done the next thing. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done the next thing. So, overall, it's probably worked out pretty well because it was the big jump off the kind of corporate ladder and into my own world. So even though at the time it didn't feel like it worked out great, I think it probably overall kind of led me here. So
yeah, it's interesting you say that, because everyone we speak to has taken different risks and different risk tolerance, but everyone says in hindsight it was the best decision because they wouldn't be sat right here and doing what they're doing. Yeah. So although it seems monumental at the time,
you're right. Then I don't know many people honestly that regret doing something like that. People actually take a chance, go and start their own. Not many people actually regret it in the end. It's difficult, and there'll be points where you probably feel like you regret it. But in a final analysis, when you look back, hardly anybody goes, no, I wish I'd stayed doing the desk job and just not even followed,
And now a message from our sponsor, Repower Daily Electrolytes. Picture this: you're in the middle of a busy day, work deadlines, family chaos, but without realizing it, your brain is running on empty. Just a 1% drop in hydration can tank your focus, reaction time, even your mood. That's why Repower Daily Electrolytes created the ultimate hydration formula. Packed with the right electrolytes your brain craves. Forget plain water. Level up your energy, sharpen your mind, and feel alive again. Stay sharp, stay strong, and hydrate smarter with Repower Daily Electrolytes. And you can use our code PLACE10 to get 10% off your first order.
and that's the wonderful thing about reflection. Those first couple of years when you leave, it's like, oh, well, I'm not making much money. We're grinding. Is it going to work? Tough times. But 3 years down the line, you're like, wow, that was the best decision I made.
Yeah. And I'm, and even longer than that, and this is I've had a number of startups now. Venturecom is probably about the fifth kind of, significant one I've had. Or the second really, big one, serious money's gone into, I guess. But, yeah, and every time, that risk feels different. Every time there's a different profile to it. And it's where you are in your life, isn't it? I mean, when I first took the leap, I didn't have kids. I was single, so it was risky for me personally because I didn't have a massive safety net either. The second time was a bit more tricky, and the hardest time actually was when I started my last company, Credas, because then I did have my daughter. She was 3 at the time, married, mortgage, and it was a different set of circumstances. So that felt much more risky in some ways.
Yeah, well, that's going to lead interestingly on to the second question, which is around your risk tolerance now. And I know you've recently started Venturecom. Yeah. But how do you view taking risk now?
I think it comes with the territory, doesn't it? If you're running your own businesses, you're running a startup, there's going to be elements of risk taking. It comes with being entrepreneurial. I think over time, I think I've probably got better at measuring risks and kind of guarding against the worst outcomes and like thinking through what can happen more. So I feel probably the magnitude of risks is kind of lower now. And I think as your life situation changes again, I mean, it's different now, having gone through what I've been through previously with companies, it feels different now, but I'm always happy to take a risk, honestly, so without being reckless, I'm always happy to try something, because I think inventiveness and trying things and being prepared to give things a go is often what makes the breakthroughs. So taking risks, I think comes with the territory really, but calculated as much as you can.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I'm always really interested in people's decision-making process with risk as well, particularly on like how long it takes.
Yeah.
For me, for example, I'm very quick. I can make quite big decisions in, as little as hours sometimes. But what about you for taking the risk of Venturecom, which was recently? What sort of thought and decision-making goes into a big decision like that?
I think it happens over maybe a slightly more elongated period where, you have an idea, there's a concept, it evolves, and then there comes a point in time you have to decide, I guess, yes or no, are you going to do it? And I guess it's how long it takes to get to that point, isn't it? A moment of decision, and that can, I mean, with Venturecom, it was over a period of time, so going back to pre-Venturecom, we sold the last business to a company in November 2023. And I stayed around through transition and didn't leave until the April 2024. So during that time, obviously, I was thinking about, am I going to stay? Am I going to go? What am I going to do next? So it's a period of time where, you formulate what's going to happen next. You think about your options. And then, there comes a point where you have to decide. So getting to that point of when you're going to decide, am I going to leave? Am I going to stay? I think that probably takes, probably takes, I would say, above average amount of time for myself. It takes me quite a while to get to that point of making a decision. But then that's different when I started off, because the example I gave previously, when I first, it was like overnight basically. I was really not enjoying this, and next day I gave my notice in, and I'm just going to take the plunge. Whereas I guess it's a bit more considered now because your life circumstances have changed.
Yeah.
So I'd say I probably come to decisions like that, big decisions, slower now, because you're kind of more aware and you evaluate more what could go wrong when the stakes are higher, I guess.
Yeah, more calculated, I guess. Yeah. I think for me, what I've not suffered, with that being the wrong word, but what I've found challenges is decision-making fatigue. When I'm overthinking on a decision for many days, even weeks sometimes. Yeah. Trying to work out the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and I've come to a formula now where if I'm 70% say that I'm sure it's going to work out, I go pretty quickly, because I find that it takes up a lot of capacity when thinking about all the pros and cons.
You're better off making a bad decision than procrastinating forever. You really are. It's a good decision's best, then a bad decision, then no decision, because it just kills you, it stifles you. You've got to make a decision eventually. I think as well, like there's a couple of things I do. Big decisions, especially if they've got to be made quickly, I always try and sleep on them. So I always try and give it, because something happens overnight, isn't it? You just feel different in the morning. You can see things differently. Your thought pattern can change. An idea can pop in your head at 4 a.m. when you wake up. And it's always worth, I find, if you can, sleep on it and just make sure you don't feel differently in the morning.
Yeah, that's always the subconscious working, isn't it? It's a very emotional-based decision. Within the first few hours of the same day, sleeping on it, you get that second wind.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, and I'm also a great, I'm a little bit spiritualist, and I quite believe that kind of putting stuff out to the universe, and to a degree, just almost waiting and feeling, and not just rushing into something, but giving a bit of time, because sometimes that kind of you feel like an answer comes back to you, or an intuition or something comes back to you. And I think where you can, for important decisions, just give it a bit of space of time, just in case something like that happens.
Yeah, I agree. I like that. So we've got loads to cover. So I want to go back to probably the bit that you mentioned, which seems to be quite a big part in your career. So you worked for a larger company, and then you left, and that was when you tasted entrepreneurship for the first time. So talk to us about that process. Who are you working for, and what made you want to leave?
So I was working for AXA. You probably know AXA, a big financial institute in Bristol, and as a developer. Not a very good one, if I'm honest. I've never thought I was a very good developer, but I left to start a development company, just a freelance development, bespoke software house with a colleague I'd met, and it was very exciting at the time. It was new, it was original. we started off with a couple of decent clients. We managed to get a bit of traction. But, when you're kind of, in hindsight, fairly clueless about the process, about funding, about, really how a business stays afloat, what it takes to get business in and succeed and plan and strategy. And looking back at it, we were just kind of playing at it, I think, really. And after a few years, it just kind of become too kind of burdensome and painful to carry on with very, very low money, very little revenue coming in. But, like I said previously, it led then to going into my next thing, which was then starting a consulting business and contracting. And then that led to another venture and so on and so forth. But I think that kind of, when you're very young and you start your first venture, there is really unless you've maybe gone through business school or you have experience some other way. For me, I went university, straight into a job writing software, into a bigger company, and then straight from there into a startup. So I was clueless, honestly, looking back at it.
Yeah. Have you ever read a book called The EMyth?
No.
Oh, that's a very good book. But it talks about when people are good at something. You said you weren't very good, but I'm sure you were as a software developer. Really and you go to do something maybe on your own or set something up, but you are so good at the thing, you just create a harder job. You don't actually set up a business. You're just tied yourself down to more work as an IC.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's another thing you see in software engineering. It's a classic thing. People that are good developers will end up. It's getting better now, actually, because you can have different routes through development and architecture, and people are recognizing the good developers. You can pay them big salaries, and you can actually keep people as developers. It used to be, though, good developers would become managers, and they become pretty poor managers or mediocre managers. So you lose a really good developer and make a poor manager, because that's the only way for career progression and to get more money. And I think that has improved recently, where developers can now be on as much money as managers or more, and rightly so if they can add more value. But it's a good example. You take something you're good at and then try and start doing something else to manage it or put a process around it. And you kind of lose, throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually, about the natural progression always seeming to be going into leadership.
That's right.
But that definitely has changed, where people become principals or chief engineers, because it is two different skill sets, right? Managing people and being a 10x engineer and just pumping out code all day is completely different.
What makes what make anybody think a really good software engineer is going to be effective at managing a team of people with all the needs and nuance that goes with that? It's a completely different skill set, isn't it?
And it's the same in recruitment, actually. Someone who just brings in big numbers, you naturally think that they will be a good leader. Just by osmosis, people would learn from them, but it's not. It's really not. It's a completely different thing. And they often don't want to teach; they just want to earn more money. So it's the same similarities, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And it's good. I mean, I think that's definitely changed in the software world. And I think, generally, I think valuing people's skills and paying for people's expertise is more important than their perceived position in the hierarchy. That said, it is difficult if as a manager, people you're managing are earning more money than you. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? And I've had that scenario as well, where you're paying people, really good developers, more money than the people that are managing them. And that's really difficult, isn't it? You're managing someone, looking at their pay increase, they're earning more than you, and but there's a natural tendency to feel you should be paid more if you're managing somebody, which is understandable. But
yeah, I completely agree. That's another layer of complexity, really, to people management, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you learnt loads in those 2 years, I'm sure, of the startup. What did you do after that?
So after we kind of didn't really get too far with the startup, we bumbled along for a few years. We had a bit of success, and then I went into contracting then. So it was a good springboard for me. I've been kind of detached from the kind of the corporate world and the kind of the 9 to 5. It was a natural segue for me to go into contracting, and I kind of moved out of development more into like product management and project management and that sort of thing. Mainly because I wasn't a very good developer, and there was more contract opportunities to go and be a project manager at the time. So I did that, and that was quite good, actually. It gave me some flexibility. I got to work with a lot of different companies, a lot of different organizations, different sizes. Actually really enjoyed it, And I always liked, actually, being a contractor versus being permanent. I always felt myself, I had a different mindset. I could add a different amount of value. I could go in for a 6-12-month contract, really achieve something, hopefully, and then, move on again, And I always found, because a couple of times it happened then through my career, where I'd start somewhere on contract and end up converting to permanent. And that happened like 3 times, actually, where you like something and you're on contract and you get involved with things. Oh, would you like to go permanent? Yeah, okay, I'll try to settle here for a bit. But then, within a year or two, I'd always, once I had a taste for entrepreneurship and starting a business, I could never stick back to just being employed somewhere. Within a year or two, I get itchy feet and just go off and do my own thing again.
Yeah, I think contracting is that small step into entrepreneurship, right? Because you have to manage, potentially find a new business, definitely your taxes, all the rest of it for yourself, not growing a business. But I think if you enjoyed that, it's very hard to go back to being a permanent employee where you're told where to go, what to do.
100%, And there's a sense as a contract, you've got to add that value. You're being paid as a contractor, and you go and you've almost got it for your own reputation and your own company. You've got it. Whereas I think with I'm not saying that many employees, I'm sure, feel the same and add a lot of value. Of course they do. I always just found it slightly different. I always felt I just had a different mentality. I didn't kind of get complacent. I was very aware that I had to add value because you can also be got rid of fairly quickly. You're there to provide a service, and if you don't provide it, you're not likely to stay around longer. So yeah, I found the contracting world quite enjoyable. I quite liked it, and I quite liked the variety because you could get to move on. You could do 6 months somewhere, and then 6 months somewhere else, and then a year somewhere else. So yeah, I like the variety, and I like the different organisations.
So you've done some permanent and some contracting up until now. You've actually started a startup as well. Yeah. At what point did you realise I want to go back into becoming a founder and start another business?
It was, just when the opportunity came along, really. It was always there in the background for me. So even when I was contracting, even when I was permanent, I'd constantly have ideas. And I can't help it, the ideas in the background. I could do a product to do this. A couple of times I went as far as actually developing stuff, just my spare time and trying to get it to market while I was working for. So it's always there. I think it was always that kind of I had a need. I felt a need to do something and try and create something outside of the 9 to 5. And then probably the most significant one then was Credas, which is my last company. So that came about through a family connection of a colleague of mine I was working with at the time, a chap called Reese. His cousin was working at the Indigo Group. It was a big Cardiff-based company. Great guys, great company. Really, really big business actually. Really, I think they're probably one of the best kept secrets in Wales. The Indigo Group. They really are quite a significant and successful business. And they wanted to create an app to do right to work checks, which was kind of how it started. They had a challenge with contractors going into construction sites and not having done the preliminary right to work and so forth. So their CEO contacted Reese, who was my co-founder, because Reese was doing IT. So of course he could build a mobile app and fix a printer, set up a laptop.
Turn it on and off.
Can do it all. He tried rebooting it. So then obviously me and Reese kind of got involved and started Credas with the view that the mobile app for Indigo would be the first thing, and we kind of initially started very much within that kind of the safety, if you like, of that environment with Indigo funding and kind of supporting the development of the product. And then obviously we saw the opportunity to roll it out wider and take it to a wider audience. And then we pivoted into things like anti-money laundering and property, and then found some traction there, and on we went.
So I want to stick on that for a while, because we've spoke about this in detail off camera. And you're the first person we've had on the podcast, one of the first people that I've spoken to really that has had great success from this approach to market. Mm-hmm. We could both agree most people who become founders would look at VCs and they'd go there straight away. Yeah. They might do it bootstrapped as well. But explain in detail exactly what the partnership that you had and how it worked and how it came about.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and we have, as you said, we spoke about this before, and I think it's a very undervalued route to funding and to early market traction and company traction, which is to sometimes in big companies you have a natural spin out or a spin off. There's lots of big examples, where companies have started as one thing and then spun out to something else. Slack was a good example. Basecamp, 37 Signals. There's lots of companies that have created an internal product, realized it has wider potential, and then spun it out into its own entity and have its own P&L, its own kind of journey. And I think almost engineering that scenario is something that's very overlooked. I think working or building a product within the context of a bigger group or a bigger company with a view that once you've proven it within that ecosystem, you can then spin it out, I think is a really, really, it kind of happened with Credas, not because we had this brilliant idea to do that. That's just kind of the way it worked. We started with this big client who was kind of very supportive and funding, and our big flagship client. And then we were able to then take it out to a wider audience. And I think there's a number of reasons that works. I mean, if you think about it, right, let's say you spend the first 9 months building your product for your parent company, a company you're kind of working with. By the end of that period, you've got a big paying client on there, i.e. your parent company. You've got a real good use case, got someone that's using it successfully. What you haven't had to do is spend those 9 months fundraising and chasing VC money and angels and trying to prove early traction and perhaps making decisions you wouldn't otherwise make to demonstrate traction and to kind of show it you're on a certain path that investors want to see. Whereas if you can do it within almost the kind of safety of that kind of, we're building this together as a kind of partnership. We're building this app for this particular use case to start with, and then we're going to go and roll it out once we've proven it. I think you end up in a really good position where you've got a great flagship client. You haven't had to go through all the VC hoops and angel hoops and everything. And also you're able to leverage the contacts then, and your parent client is able to open doors for you. People they know, you can show them a working system. And I think it's just a really effective, and it's something that I would encourage other companies to do. If there's a really obvious flagship client, potentially kind of, partnership clients, why not kind of have a closer relationship to start with? Build something that works for them, but just with an agreement that you're going to spin it out afterwards from a position of having developed something and proven it in a kind of slightly more kind of friendly and collaborative environment. I think as well, because in our case, and I think this would be true of most examples like this, where you're working with a company like that, because they're not really professional investors, they have different expectations. So they're very much on the journey. It's exciting for them. We're going to build this and spin it out. And it's certainly with Credas and with Indigo, who are our kind of parent partnership company, it was very much that, it was all, we were on the journey together. It was exciting. It was something we felt could go somewhere and could be really significant for all of us. And everyone had bought into the journey, and I think it was just a really nice early life for the company. Those first couple of years where we were really able to develop something and then spin it out and pivot it from a really good position.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So just to relay it back to you, Indigo had a problem, right? And they instructed the tech professionals to come and solve that problem, but build something internally.
Yeah.
And the idea from the very beginning was to build it, scale it, make sure it works, and then do a spin out and then sell that to the market.
Yeah.
So like you said, there'll probably be lots of situations like this. Yeah. What I often see is companies will notice a gap in a company's product or services. They will build that, go to VC, and then it will become acquired by that company. Whose responsibility or who should take accountability for noticing these situations? Should you, in this example, the developer, approach Indigo, or do Indigo approach developers to solve their own problems?
I think both. I think it can be both. And I also think, even within a company, if you're working in a large company and there's an idea or a product or a project, why not try and engineer that? Why not have a conversation? Why not just build this for ourselves? Let's build it with a mindset we can spin it out. I love that concept, honestly. People being a bit entrepreneurial, see an opportunity. Let's just not build this for ourselves. Let's try and build it in a way. And in that way, new founders are born, new products are created, and you can be a bit more entrepreneurial. You can actually build something deliberately. I mean, let's say you're looking at companies these days looking at AI. How can they use AI? We're gonna do something to use it. Why not look at it with a mindset of let's build something that solves our problem, and that we can then go and spin out and it can become a company in its own right?
Yeah. So what's the reason you think companies, when they have a problem like that, they look externally for an off-the-shelf product rather than build themselves?
Yeah, the buy or build is a classic dilemma, isn't it? And it's obviously speed. You go externally, you're buying something proven, you can bring it in, plug it in quickly. Building it yourself is more risky, more cumbersome. You might get something a bit more, bespoke and a bit more suitable at the end, but it's a much more risky journey, a much more expensive journey. But I think if you do it with a mindset of this has got the potential, not everything does, not every product, not every project you're going to do is going to have the potential to be spun out into its own business, but some will. And I think recognizing those and embracing the opportunity and actually really thinking as you develop a product or a project within a company, whether it has the potential to become something separate and bigger, I think it's a really interesting angle. And when you do see it happen effectively, it's great and it looks really obvious. These companies, these products spin out of big companies and they become huge, successful corporates themselves. But I think even for smaller companies, small to medium companies embarking on projects, just have a mindset of this could be a separate product, and have that. If you build it in a way that lends itself to that, so when you're thinking about, how it fits within the context of the wider business, if you've got a mindset of one day we're going to spin this out, you can kind of deliberately keep certain things separate. You can structure it in a certain way so it lends itself to that. And it was what happened with Credas and Indigo. Not out of a grand master plan. It just worked that way, and it worked. It worked really well. And the reason I say it, and the reason I keep going back to this point is, I often find myself, when people ask about the Credas journey, I often find myself saying, we were really lucky because this happened, or what was great for us was that happened, or we didn't really have that problem because that happened. And I kind of got to realize, that all those things, it's because of the model we worked in. And like, why not really use that model or engineer that scenario deliberately where you can? So it's different to what I've done in the past. Previously to that, I was tried to raise money through VCs and angels and that kind of thing. But yeah, it just worked really well. So
Yeah. I'm sure we could be here for a whole hour on just Credas. So we'll cover some of the highlight points, and then we'll get on to what you're doing now. So you mentioned there that you've built the product for Indigo. You've realized it works. You now added new features on there as well. Talk to me about the process for when you realized, okay, we're going to spin out and go externally now. How did you gain your first customers? How involved were you in speaking to them and winning them from a sales perspective?
Yeah. It's getting your first customers is tricky, isn't it? And it's a chicken and egg scenario, isn't it? Because you need to kind of have proven traction to attract people and to demonstrate the product works. And that was one of the massive advantages of what we did, because we had a working product. It was used at a fairly big scale, and we could show it working and show the benefits and show it to competitors, partners, other people within the network, and it was easier to get traction that way. When we pivoted, which was probably the most significant thing we did, we kind of pivoted more into property and anti-money laundering. And why we started just doing identity verification and right to work, and then we introduced data checks and PEPs and sanctions checks and other things which more suited to money laundering, KYC type solution. So I think when we did that, it was tough because, and I'm going back now, this would be say 2018, something like that. And even then, like facial recognition stuff was still relatively new. People were still getting used to it. It was kind of becoming mainstream on your phone, but it was still quite new. So our solution was facial recognition, scan your passport, or magic happened. Everything was verified, and people were very distrustful of it. Why would you want to do that? Why would you? I'm not giving you my passport. Are you mad? Scanning a picture of your face and trying to do these liveness tests and all that kind of stuff. So it's very, very difficult getting the early traction. What we were really lucky in Credas, actually, I mentioned my co-founder, Reese. Now, Reese is probably the best person I've ever worked with for being able to open doors and make things happen. He is exceptional there. He has a talent for being able to make things happen, bring people on a journey and get into the right rooms. And he was able to, I'm sure it wasn't easy because it took a while, but he was able to land one in particular pretty big client. He was like an industry known client. And once we had that, there was a notable point for us where, do you know what I mean when I say like a push versus a pull for sales? So like we'd be going out and pushing the platform to people. You should do this. It's a more effective way of doing your compliance. You should use this automated solution. And you're trying to push it onto people. It's difficult. As soon as we landed this first flagship client, suddenly people were asking us for it, and there was just a pull for it. And there was I remember quite a significant realization of people are now asking us for the product. And then that was the key. It was landing that. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we talk a lot about product market fit and stuff like that. And the reality for us was it was the same product and it was what the market needed, but people didn't realize they needed it, or they didn't feel it was validated until they could point to some other bigger player using it.
Yeah,
so
that's the word there, validated. I think, isn't it?
Yeah. So we always probably had product market fit. We just didn't. The market didn't know or weren't prepared to take it off us until someone else had jumped first, and then. Yeah, and then I suppose the other really significant thing for us is, as terrible it was at the time for all of us, was the COVID pandemic. I remember overnight, there was the first lockdown, everything stopped, didn't it? Everything just, everything fell off a cliff, and it was, everyone in kind of shock, and it was a really surreal time, wasn't it? And I guess at the time for every business there was massive uncertainty. There was for us, we were still loss making at that point, so we were reliant on funding, and suddenly there was no money for anything, and it was there was a real, I guess for most businesses, us included, there was a real good chance things could have just ended there. And it's like, look, it's just not viable to continue spending any money on anything that isn't, absolutely essential. But what happened during the lockdown was suddenly we were the only solution people had, because what Credas is, it's remote verification. So suddenly, because people couldn't go into branches and couldn't meet face to face, the only way they could do IDV and AML KYC was a remote solution. So suddenly, our numbers went, literally, one of our big clients went from having a few hundred branches to a couple of thousand branches, over about 6 weeks. So really just exploded, and I think it never really went back. Like a lot of things after the pandemic, things like virtual meetings instead of face-to-face, that's never gone back, is it? People working remotely instead of from the office. There's been step changes which just haven't rode back. And I think, remote IDV and, remote KYC checks are one of those. Why would you go back now to scanning stuff on a photocopier and taking when you've got used to now doing it all remotely in 2 minutes on an app, But it took something like that to enforce the change. And I think that's true, though. I mentioned things like remote meetings, and same for that. It took something like the pandemic and the need to have to do it for people to realize that's so much easier. Why am I going to drive to Leeds when I can do it in,
And remote working.
Yeah,
as well. Before it was maybe, if and when maybe the tech team, COVID hit and everyone is remote working.
Yeah.
And we're nearly going back. Some companies are, but
bit,
yeah. But I completely agree. And COVID was a very tough time for everyone personally, but it was a very varied time for businesses. And some businesses like yours thrived and sales increased, and I know many others that did. But then on the other end, some companies didn't make it through, and it was a weird, complex time.
Dreadful. One of the hardest things I think probably all of us have experienced in our life, or certainly one of the hardest. But it enforced like a step change in so many ways. And the other side of it, things are just different. The world's different. There's remote working. There's online meetings everywhere. There's things are digitized now that previously people were reluctant to make that step. I always remember, one of the most kind of like significant examples of this for me was just after the first pandemic. Myself and CEO actually of Indigo were due to go up to Leeds for a demo of the platform, and we were going to drive to Leeds. Right, that's like a 4.5 hour drive for one meeting, and then drive back. And it was just because people we were meeting, and I don't like virtual meetings. I like to see press some flesh and all that kind of So we were going to do that. That would have been 11 hours, whatever, the whole day to drive there, do a meeting and drive back. In the end, we had to do it on Teams. We had no choice. We were like, well, we're going to have to do it on Teams because no one can actually be in the same room together. And it was just, you look at that, it took 20 minutes to call, and you pick the phone up, you do your Teams call, 20 minutes later it's done. It's exactly the same outcome. You deliver the same demo, and you haven't had to drive for 11 hours. And you're looking at going like, obviously,
I always think we were crazy beforehand, driving however many hours to get to a meeting.
Yeah, but it literally would have. It hadn't been for that, we would have, and we would have carried on doing it, because certain people just didn't like doing remote meetings.
Yeah.
So.
Let's fast forward a bit then, because I know a lot of people are going to be interested in the sale of Credas. Particularly when you realised, we want to sell this business, and then what was the process like? Who did you have to speak to, and how did it work?
Yeah, it's tricky. The M&A process is tough. It's tough to get through, and it's grueling, and it takes a lot longer than you think. And there's always pitfalls along the way. We actually we tried multiple times. So the last time when we actually managed to actually get a sale, that was our kind of fourth attempt, or certainly the third significant attempt. Typical process. You can find good advisors. First thing I say to people talking about selling a business, get really good advisors. We're lucky we've got some in Cardiff, some really good M&A advisors you can look up. Getting good advisors and good management advisors, really, really important. I'm not sorry.
I was going to say, let's stick on that then for a minute. Let's pretend I'm selling my first business and I don't know any advisors. How do you pick a good advisor?
So, you're looking at, someone local's good. I know we're talking about doing everything remotely, but having someone local in the vicinity you can meet with is very useful. People that have sold similar businesses, I think it's very useful. And speak to a couple, see you connect with. When you go through the process, you end up with such a close relationship with your advisor, because you kind of, for months, you're living and breathing the same thing. You're trying to get the same outcome. And you become, it's never like a period of weeks, sometimes it is. Typically, it's going to be many, many months. And it's a real roller coaster. It's an emotional roller coaster, literally. So having someone you can work with and someone that you can get on with and someone that you have a good rapport with is really important. If you've got an advisor that you don't really feel is working for you, you're not really connected with them, that's going to make the whole thing 10 times harder. So speak to a couple, find someone you connect with and that you like, and preferably someone that sold similar businesses or has a good reputation, and speak to some other companies they've represented. Most advisors are happy for you to do that and go and speak to some other deals they've done and kind of get a feel for how they work. But it's a really, really important choice. It's a really significant element in the whole M&A process is who your advisor is.
And that'd be your first thing to do, right? You want to instruct someone to sell the business, get the best advisor.
100%. Get a good advisor. They will help you then shape your decks and your IMs and your valuations, and they'll also bring people to the table. So I'd never recommend doing it yourself, And they're not, let's be honest, right? Good M&A advisors aren't cheap. They'll work on a success fee, so there'll be a retainer, but most of their money will probably come from a success fee, and that's probably going to be quite a lot of money. When you look at what you sell a company for, they're high margin businesses. They make when a transaction's successful, there's a significant price to them. But I tell you what, right? Almost always they'll add more value than that. Certainly the ones we've worked with definitely add more value to the transaction than their fee is. So that alone makes it worthwhile, right? But plus, they stop you making stupid mistakes, stop you doing stupid deals, being tripped up, being tricked into certain scenarios where necessarily you might be a bit naive. I'm not a professional deal negotiator. So it's like me trying to negotiate deals with PE houses and trade buyers. Lord knows how that would finish. So yeah, good advisors. First step, isn't it? Really good advisor. The second thing I think is really key is to give your advisor really clear red lines. It's very easy to go into a process and go, yeah, we think we'd like to sell for roughly this. And then by the end, it's completely changed. You've been watered down. Some of your demands haven't really been met, but there comes a point where you're so desperate to get the deal done, you're more likely to agree to things. And having really clear red lines from the start is really important. So if you say to them, look, I want to walk away with this much money on day one, and that's a red line, right? Let your advisor know that, and then it's their kind of job. They can negotiate and structure a deal like that. I think if you don't do that early on, you can get drawn into a place where later in the deal, you're then trying to set out what you want. Things have already happened, valuations have been set, deal structures are kind of been sketched out between parties. And even as a founder, it can become quite hard for you to really reinsert yourself and your demands back into that process, especially when there's multiple people involved. If it's just you've probably got a stronger position. When it's multiple co-founders and investors, and you've got to find a deal that keeps everybody happy. If you don't have those red lines early on, so everyone's clear what they're dealing with and clear what the deal structure's got to look like, that really becomes difficult later.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Yeah, there's like a guiding North Star. This is our sale number that we'd like. We cannot go below this.
Yeah, 100%.
Anything between that's your job to work out.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I personally want to walk away with on day one. Because what will happen, if you're going through a trade sale, there'll probably be an earn-out period. So you'll have some money on day one, then you'll have probably an earn-out period over a period of time. If you do something like a PE deal, you're probably going to roll over then into the next cycle. And all those things are really important. If you structure a deal badly, you can honestly end up giving a huge amount of your equity just into the ether. Give you an example, right? If you do a PE deal, maybe you get some investment, you get some growth capital, someone buys the company and rolls it into a new vehicle, which would be quite typical. You'll be expected to roll over into that new vehicle as well. You'll probably get some money out day one, and the rest you'll roll in and make a commitment to go on a journey for another 5-7 years, whatever. Yeah. Now, it may well be that you don't particularly like that new world. Give it a year, you might want to get out of it, but probably because of the structure of the deal and the agreements you sign, you'll probably end up having to leave some or most of your equity behind if you do that. So you end up only having your day one money, which might be a fairly small percentage of what it could have been. All those things, these are key considerations when you're looking at any kind of exit opportunity or liquidity event, really, really understanding. And I go back to this point in particular, right? What do you want on day one? Not what I want overall. What do you want out on day one? Because after that, anything after that, is not necessarily guaranteed. You might want to circumstances change. The company buying you might change. Really be clear for your red line. What do you want out on day one? And that's the biggest red line I say to any founder. Be really clear with your advisor on day one. I want this amount of money out. Now you can't guarantee that. If you ask for something unrealistic, it's not going to happen, is it? but try and be really clear right from the start what your red line is, because it's easier for them to work that into the deal all the way through, or tell you you're not being realistic and change your expectation. But don't wait to the end to work out what you personally want to have in your bank account on the day of the sale, because it will become difficult if you leave it later.
Yeah, solid points. Set the groundworks and the foundations early on what you want. Yeah. If my memory serves me correctly, you had quite a cool story about how the business was acquired in the end. I think it was done in quite a short time frame. Are you able to go into a bit more information on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was acquired by a PLC, a listed company in Canada. So, can be a little bit careful about what I say, because it's a listed company, and I couldn't go into numbers or anything like that. But there was a few interesting points along the way. The day we actually signed the deal, so we signed it in the August actually, but we didn't actually complete until November. So there was a period where we had to go through CMA, the Competition Mergers Authority, and also NSIA, National Security, and checks like that, because we had some government clients. So there was this kind of delay between everyone signing the contract and actually everything completing and money being transferred. And it's really strange, because the day we signed the contract, we were all up until, I think it was like 2 a.m. or something. So we had lawyers our side, lawyers by side, we had our advisors, we had obviously myself, the other founders, all the investors, probably like 17, 20 people, maybe more, all still feverishly doing stuff at 2 a.m. And then when the paperwork came through, everyone had to wake up, partners to witness and sign everything. It was, Reese, my original co-founder, was camping. he was hanging out of his tent with a phone, trying to get a signal to sign something. But it was this mad kind of scramble we got to sign it today. No one go to sleep until we signed it. And then it was really strange, because we did that and then waited 3 months for all these checks to happen. So I never really quite got that. But I guess it's, when you get close, everyone just wants it done then. If you all go to sleep, the next day something else has happened. There's another delay maybe. So yeah, I get the need to get it over the line and just finish it now before anyone sleeps. But yeah, that was a pretty crazy time. And then the other really challenging thing I found, which sounds bizarre, and I know this sounds bizarre, and I know people will look at it as a first world problem and all the rest of it, but the day we were actually waiting for the money to arrive was agonizing. I mean, literally agonizing. You think it'd be the easiest thing. All the hard work's done. All that's going to happen now is the money's going to appear and it gets distributed, brilliant. But honestly, that whole day, we were told the money was going to arrive at like 10 a.m. So 1 minute past 10, everyone's frantic. And then it was 11 a.m., then it was midday, and then it was afternoon. And I remember my investors, I mean, really, solid guys, great guys, and successful guys, experienced guys. But we were all in the same boat. I mean, no one could do anything. No one could concentrate. No one could think about work. People were walking out of meetings to get updates. It was just, and I don't know why. I think it was that, because you're on that knife edge, right? Of you start getting paranoid. Something's changed. They're not gonna do it after all.
Have they sent it to the wrong details?
Something's gone wrong now. Maybe some last minute thing has happened. Now they're going to pull out and not going to. And you just get this huge paranoia. And you're like, on the one side, you've got this amazing outcome for everyone that's worked for 7 years, and it's so close, and it means so much to everybody. And then you kind of get in your mind, it could be this actually, And you're just, there's nothing you can do about it, because it's just money's being transferred somewhere. And I just remember that day being the most stressful, really agonizing 8 hours. And of course, it was the end of the day when it got transferred.
It was that day, though.
It was that day. It was literally like 5:30 or something.
What was the feeling? Can you remember that day very vividly on when the money went in? You seen it?
Yeah.
How'd you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it was relief, really, because it almost goes from the kind of elation, because you got so stressed about it. It's just that. But I do remember it's like, I'm sure I wasn't alone in doing this. And I'm sure many people have done it, but you're kind of on your online banking, just refresh, and then like, no, like, like a fruit machine, isn't it? No, then one time, you refresh it. Yeah, I mean, it's relief. I know it meant a lot to a lot of people, to a lot of people have been on the journey since quite early on. People had kind of left jobs, more secure jobs, taking their own risks to come in and come on the journey and taking their own chances. And thankfully, a lot of people got something significant out of it. Obviously, to the investors and my fellow co-founders, it meant a lot to a lot of people. So it was yeah, by the end, it was just relief that it hadn't all fallen through, and yeah, it's the culmination of so much effort, and the M&A process is it really does take it out of you. For us, I mean, we started the process in January, and then eventually, 2nd of November, I think it was when it finished. So, and that is grueling. That's a long time to be, not quite sure what, is the future going to be amazing over here, or is it going to be like over here? We've got to go again for another,
That's a very, very long time. And I think that was one of the reasons what helped you start your new business, which we'll come on to in a minute. But you sold the business. What do you do? Do you go on holiday and relax for a bit? Or how long was it between then and starting a new business?
Not.
I know the answer.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I obviously wanted to stay around for a while and see how things worked out in the new world. So and to be fair, I think it's worked out very well. I think the company's gone from strength to strength. It's doing really good. Tim, the CEO, still in place and still doing a fantastic job, and it's all on the right trajectory. And I think it's been a good outcome. I think all round, and I think the acquirers, I think and hope are pleased. And I think it's a good outcome for everyone. And the people that invested, our investors, and the guys from Indigo, and I think everyone had a pretty good outcome. But I wanted to stay around for a while and see where it went, see what the new business was going to be like, and obviously make sure the transition went smoothly. Technically, obviously, the company's part of a much bigger group, and there's things that come with that, whether it's kind of like a lot of positives and opportunities. There's also change inevitably. So I stayed around for a while, but then kind of decided that a couple of things really. The company didn't really need me anymore. I think there was better people than me in the company, better people technically, better people to run things, better people to take it on the next stage of its journey. And that's what it is really. It's the next stage of a journey. And when you kind of done 7 years and you kind of been right through it and you kind of get to the right, now we're going to go again into something new. I just decided I would step aside and do something else. But then when it actually came to, I ended up kind of leaving on the Friday and then kind of straight into the next thing on the Monday. So I didn't take much time off, to be honest.
So you had a weekend off.
I had a weekend off, I needed to, yeah, and then straight in again. So, but yeah, I think that's all part of the journey, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you've had that success once. You've had the taste of it. You've built something. You've scaled something. You've got a great achievement, and you now know it can be done again.
Ooh. Yeah, I think that's it. You do get a lot of confidence. From the first success, and I'm lucky as well. The Indigo guys have come back on the journey again, as individuals this time. So that's nice. We all know each other. We're all friends, and I think, and we're all going again, and see what happens this time. It's a very different proposition this time. Nothing to do with IDV or AML. It's as you know, it's a very different animal, but
yeah, completely different. And I've seen the platform on a demo look fantastic, very easy on the eye, and great for people who are going through that process, because like we spoke about, it's a very long process for people to put together these documents and keep them in one place. And it's going to hopefully change the industry substantially for the better. But for anyone that doesn't know Venturecom, what is it? What's the problem it's solving?
Yeah, so it's the problem we had really throughout our journey at Credas, and a problem I've experienced previously as well, which is as a scaling company, you don't necessarily understand what all your key metrics are. You don't really understand how your valuation is going to end up working, and you don't necessarily make good strategic decisions based on the right data. So what Venturecom does, it plugs into your source systems. So things like your accounting platform, Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, whatever you're using. We pull back all your financial data and then cut and dice it into the most relevant metrics and data series. And then we turn that into a scorecard, which is then updated daily. A bit like a kind of credit report you might get individually. Every day you can log in, or every week you can log in and see your score somewhere between 0 and 999. And then you can see the positive and negative factors. We do something similar really. So we consume data from different sources, preferably from actual source systems like your finance accounting systems, and then put together a pretty detailed scorecard on what's good and what's not good, kind of viewing you how an investor would view you, or how an advisor is going to view you when you engage with them. So it's a really nice way of getting that continual finger on the pulse feedback of where your company is, and it kind of turning something which is quite complex, which is a real understanding of your numbers and your metrics, into something quite easy to consume because it's just, distilled into a number and then a breakdown of positives and negatives that you can act on.
Yeah. So let's say someone signed up to the platform, they realize that the benefit to having all these systems is that they can put it into one place.
Yeah.
How quickly can that be done on Venturecom?
Yeah, minutes. I mean, we connect into your source system. Well, you connect. We don't. You go yourself through. You connect into say Xero if you're using Xero. Make that connection. We drag the data back in. Within 5 minutes, you'll have a detailed view of your data, your key metrics. Things like, I'll tell you a couple of really important ones which kind of tripped us up in particular. Things like your recurring revenue versus non-recurring revenue. So understanding the importance of revenue being recurring versus ad hoc revenue. In terms of valuation and what people will look for as an investor and acquirer, really, really important, especially for a SaaS business. Give you an example. One of our earlier ill-fated attempts to go out through the M&A process, we got reasonably far with a fund down in London, and they were giving us a multiple on our ARR, our annual recurring revenue. It's about 4x they were giving us, which was quite good. It would have been a good deal at the time, right? But the way we calculated our ARR compared to the way they calculated it was just wildly different. I mean, as in like an order of magnitude, So, well, we thought we were getting one valuation. They looked at our numbers and said, no, So we thought, we had customers that had been 2 years they've been using us. Every month they've been buying off us similar amounts. We thought that was recurring revenue. Not according to an investor or a PE house, because it's not contracted subscription licensed revenue. That's just struck off, So all those kind of things, we then spent 2 years remodeling the business to turn all our revenue into contracted revenue. If we'd known the importance of that from the start, we'd have probably done things differently. We'd have struck different contracts with clients. We'd have probably been far more aggressive about getting specifically ARR rather than just revenue.
Yeah, and it's very difficult for first-time founders, especially, to know this stuff if they've never gone through this process.
If you don't know, yeah, exactly. Again, strategic decisions. Another classic one is client concentration. So if you've got a lot of revenue coming from a small number of clients, that's obviously a higher risk point. So that was the same for us. We had one really big client who constituted about 50-something% of our revenue, and then 2 other pretty big clients. And between those 3, something like 80% of our revenue is coming from 3 clients. So that's from an investment point of view, out of 700 clients, 80% of your revenue is coming from 3 of them. And actually 2 of those technically aren't recurring. You look at these numbers and you go, yeah, no wonder it fell apart. I mean, at the time, we were like, this is so unreasonable. How can they not count them? But I get it. You look at it and go, well, yeah, there is risk there. You've got a lot of eggs in one basket. Your revenue's not really locked down. But just understanding that stuff and making it easy. So, you haven't got to be an accountant to do this. As long as you can plug Venturecom into your systems, we can give you a really good view of what revenue is actually recurring based on looking at the invoices and looking at the patterns of payments and what invoices are actually categorized as. So we can give you a really good idea of what's recurring, what isn't recurring, your client concentrations, your growth rates, your burn multiples, all those kind of things just distilled into something that's quite easy to understand and then take decisions on.
Yeah, so let's imagine a startup has gone through that process. They've got a score of 978. Pretty good, I would imagine.
Yeah. It's out of 100, so 97.8.
Yeah, pretty close then. And what do they do with that data or that produced information? Is it their responsibility to then take that out to private equity firms and venture capitalists, or do you facilitate that process as well?
So no, I mean, first off, they get updated daily. So as they're going through the journey, I think where we can add the most value is in showing people a score and how to improve it, so that when they get to a process, they're in a much better place. The time to really think about this, ideally, is not when you're about to go into a process, but it's early on in the journey. So all the way through, you're keeping yourself in as good a place as possible. So when you do go into a process, things are in a good shape and you shape the company in the right way to make it appealing. So starting early is really important. Now, realistically, M&A advisors, and they go into a lot of detail. They're going to do their own maths and they're going to look at your numbers and they're going to crunch it and represent it in a certain way. But what Venturecom will let you do is get to that process in the best state possible. So when you do go there, you've got everything in one place. You've got your numbers. You can go to an advisor. It's a great starting point for them where they can go, right, I've got all this data. I can see where the problems are going to be, where you're strong, where you're weak. It's a great starting point for them to work from. And you can share it then. You can create reports and share it with investors. Or it's another thing I think a lot of companies are quite bad at doing is sharing updates with investors. Yeah, I mean, I've done a bit of angel investing myself, and I can see it from the other side. I can totally see how investors can get a little bit frustrated when you don't really get good, MI, you don't really get good data and updates coming back from companies you invest in. And that's another, I think, great use case for the platform, for Venturecom. Very easily this information's crunched, made available, reportable on, and shareable with your investors. So them having a constant window into some of these key metrics and being able to not have to chase for information and not have to be starved of updates for, months at a time. Very nice way of, just being able to communicate and engage more effectively with potential investors or indeed actual investors as you kind of move forward.
Yeah, definitely. I've often heard that the investor and founder relationship, the communication in between sometimes isn't as good as it needs to be. So that's a great use case.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the key with all this stuff is making it non-intrusive and passive. So what we didn't want to do is create something where people have got to log in and constantly update their numbers, because people won't do it. Do you know what I mean? People inherently, it's not on the top of your list. Do you know what I'm going to do today is go and update it. But doing it passively, so that's why we plug into source systems and just pull the data. So it's just there when you need it, and it just happens in the background. We also build like a data room in the background. So we're pulling data, we're constantly getting everything into one place, constantly crunching the metrics and showing you the right scoring, what you need to do to improve things. And it's just trying to make it a background task.
Yeah, definitely. So where is the product at the minute? Am I right that you released recently? It's out to market?
Yeah. So we're live. We've got a small number of clients, I would say, at the moment, who are giving us some really good feedback and starting to get some value out of the platform, which is great. We're going to do a bit of a kind of big launch in July. That's when we're going to start really kind of pushing the platform to a wider audience and kind of opening it up to more people to self-sign and jump on and start using it. So yeah, we're at that kind of, that kind of slight breath at the moment before we charge ahead into the kind of next full-blown rollout mode.
Definitely. So what's on for the rest of the calendar year then? So that's going to be in July, the big launch. What about the next 6 months after that, assuming all things go well?
Yes, I mean, lots of feature changes, so there's lots of things planned. There's, like all things, isn't there? The problem is you have new feature ideas come out and you're like, oh, let's just get that in as well. And it's knowing when to actually go, no, let's just, let's go with this, and then just have a roadmap afterwards so we can keep introducing. So there's loads of good features we got coming out, tie in your scores and your ongoing scorecards to valuation ranges based on different like valuation mechanisms, that kind of stuff. There's loads of improvements around the data room, loads of improvements around networking and being able to share your scorecards with people being able to apply their own scores. So as an advisor or an investor, I'd be able to look at your company and apply my own score into it so I can see how I'd assess you. Portfolio management, so larger investment firms with a portfolio of companies using the platform to be able to track and kind of get a view across their portfolio and warning signals as things progress. So we've got loads, and I mean, it's just it's never ending, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. For anyone watching, then, because I'm always surprised at the audience we get and some of the feedback we get, who would benefit from joining the platform most? And we're thinking local companies, because a lot of local startup entrepreneurs will see this.
Yeah, I think fintechs is a great use. I think it lends itself really nicely to early stage scaling up fintechs, any technology businesses. Any businesses really, but I think in particular, fintechs is a great use case.
And particularly early on in the journey. So we're talking like as soon as...
The earlier the better, yeah. I mean, it's because it's passive. You haven't got to be an accountant. You can plug it in very quickly. You're going to get meaningful data back. So even if early on, you can look at your data, look at the key things and understand, a bit more about your burn multiple or your growth rate or your revenue composition. Things that are going to really ultimately go to value and things you can deliberately and strategically change over time. The earlier you get that view of how an investor is actually going to see you and how you're going to structure your business to maximize the value, the better.
Yeah, it's a really good point. The earlier the better, because it's a different mindset then. You're aware of all these things, you're making decisions based on these things as well, and you understand what the effect is of making a decision and how it's going to look to advisors or investors.
That is absolutely the key. And if you don't really understand these numbers and metrics, you can easily go in the wrong strategic direction. Example, we're talking earlier about client concentration. You might think it's great having one or two really big clients. Oh yeah, we'll do more of that and we'll put more of our energy into them, which is okay. But the problem is you're increasing your client concentration and your reliance on a small number of clients, which is actually going to hurt your value later. So strategically, you might be better off trying to deliberately diversify. But if you haven't got eyes on that and you don't understand the significance of it in the context of your overall score, your kind of overall scorecard, you can easily be doing things which strategically aren't probably the right way to go. And all those things then just have compound ramification effects. The quicker you can see the view of your business, how an investor's going to see it later down the line, the quicker you're going to be aware. You might not be able to change anything straight away. And the way you run the business in the early days is going to be different to the way you run it in years 3, 4, 5. But being aware of that and being able to see it and understand what's going to be important, I think the earlier you get that visibility, the better.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah, really good point. So I imagine Venture Comet is taking most of your time at the minute. Next 6 months for you personally. You mentioned angel investing. Are you still looking at going down that route and actively investing?
Yeah. So I've made a few investments this year, which have been cool. All local companies. And some really interesting businesses, especially around Cardiff and Southwest. We're lucky. We've got really, really good opportunities with new businesses coming through. There's a couple more I'm looking at the moment as well, which is interesting. Outside of that, I'm attempting to play golf.
I haven't even attempted yet. I need to get lessons. I think it's a must.
I played last Friday and ambitiously, although it wasn't my choice, ambitiously took on the 2010 course at Celtic Manor and just got ruined.
Straight in the deep end.
Mate, yeah. I mean, I played it once before and it was tough, but yeah, it was particularly hard last Friday. So
are you having lessons at the minute?
No, when I was younger, I used to play a lot. So when I was, I started playing when I was about 10, So there's been points in my life where I've been reasonable, where I played a lot. And then my daughter was born and I didn't play for 10 years. And I kind of now just kind of picking it back up again. So it's kind of like every now and again, there'll be like a little hint of like, oh yeah, I know how to play this game.
Still got it.
Yeah, I still got it. But then there'll be 4 holes of like, lost balls and, and frustration. So that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah. All right, last question then. I'm going to choose something around people management and building relationships with people. So from all your experience, different startups, larger companies, particularly a sale with Credas, what's the one thing that you think people would benefit from knowing around managing people and being seen as a leader?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I think bringing people on the journey with you is really important, but in a meaningful way. I think the worst thing for people is stagnation, not really progressing and like being stuck in a rut and not really seeing a way to progress, personally or professionally. So enabling growth, I think, is really important, but also enabling, financial success. We were one of the things I was most proud of at Credas was we were able to put a decent pot aside for everybody. So there was a good number of people in the exit had like a meaningful amount of money, and I think that sense because of that sense of us all being on a journey and working towards something was tangible. We all knew, everyone in the company knew we were working towards something, and there was a big prize at the end for all. Not like a meaningless, you're going to get a couple of hundred. I mean, a significant result at the end, and I think having that in not just like not a superficial way in some meaningless shares, but actually, really tangibly giving people some skin in the game, I think is really important. And I think, as a leader, that's really, really important that you recognize people like to be involved and they deserve to be involved. They deserve to have part of the success and not hogging at yourself, but in a meaningful way, bring people on the journey and letting everyone share in that success. And it's very easy to do that, like I say, in a really superficial way where you can say, oh, we've done this, we've done that. But I think really in a genuine way, giving people a route to, hopefully, potentially life-changing or certainly significant money as part of a collective journey, I think is one of the strongest forms of leadership for me.
Yeah, and that increases loyalty and hard work as well.
Yeah, and there's a genuine sense of, I'm doing this because there's a result for me and for my colleagues and, all of us, and I think that's really, really important, that, and it facilitates growth and it facilitates financial growth and a route to, financial success. And I think that's really, really important, as well as, being able to, as far as possible, being able to facilitate opportunities, let people grow professionally, let people try new things, always open to people going on slightly different pivots, if you like, within a career or changing to slightly different roles. And I think that anything but stagnation, anything but you're doing the same thing with no real route to getting something significant at the end of it or changing, anything that facilitates growth, because growth is irresistible for humans. Stifling growth is the most depressing thing ever. So having a route to growth and allowing it, facilitating it and encouraging it, whether it's financial, whether it's towards a significant liquidity event and sharing in that, whether it's having career opportunities, facilitating growth is critical, I think.
Some very, very solid advice there, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's been great speaking to you. I really appreciate your time.
It's been wonderful, Kieran. Thank you very much. Hopefully I'll come on again at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is the end of episode 14 with Kevin Smith. What a wonderful journey Kevin has had as a Cardiff-based entrepreneur, selling Credas back in 2022 and now jumping straight back into it with Venturecom. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe and let us know if there's anyone else you want to see on this podcast. And we look forward to seeing you next time.